once again, I return to the internet. First day went a bit rocky, second day went a little bit better. Here's hoping I can just get going today without a single technical difficulty. Wouldn't that be nice if I could just not mess anything up myself or encounter messed up internet problems for one stream? Is it even possible? Maybe. Maybe not. Looks like Twitch is working. Looks like YouTube is working. I just have to sanity check every time. And I'm going to do it until I do this like 30 times in a row without issue. I'm just going to be like, did it work? I'm short on time today, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I think I might actually get to write some new code, which should be fun, but it looks like it goes for an hour and 45 today, so maybe I won't finish this day up today, but I think I'll at least get to write some new code finally instead of chasing bugs that should never have been in there to begin with. So we'll see how it goes.
Exactly that. Welcome everyone to Handmade Hero, the show where we build an entire game from scratch, no libraries, no engine, basically for two reasons. One, because it's a lot of fun, and two, because it is pretty educational, I think. I've always been very happy that I knew how all of the stuff worked at a low level for all of game development stuff, even when I did stuff that wasn't low level or was working on projects where we were using libraries or that sort of thing. It's really good, I feel like, to know absolutely everything that happens in the full stack of a game, because it just makes you a lot more powerful, and basically, it lets you have complete control when you need it. It lets you know that no matter what happens, you can always go down to the engine source code, you can always go make your own stuff if you need to work around something, because you kind of know how everything works, instead of having to sort of be beholden to whatever someone else makes, and having to live with whatever problems might exist in something that you're using. So I'm having a blast so far, and we finally got to what I think is the much more fun part of things, because basically we spent, I think we estimated it was about 25 hours worth of time working on a Win32 prototyping layer, because we've basically got to give ourselves some services we can use. We got to write those ourselves that can do things like display bitmap and play sound and get user input, so that we have something to make our game on. But we have done that, and now we are in a position to make our game. Now, we haven't actually done the shipping version of that platform layer, obviously, yet. We only did just a prototype version, so it's not a fantastic platform layer, I think, but it is plenty good enough for our purposes of getting the game running and developing the game to a certain point. So,
hey, John, thanks for popping in. Feel free to lurk. That's totally fine.
With that in mind, today I would like to actually start doing the game development proper, which I think is really cool, because that's going to be a lot more fun than monkeying with Win32. So if you pre-ordered the game on handmadehero.org, you should have gotten a link, an email with a link in it. That email link will allow you to download the source code, and the source code comes as a giant zip file which has every day's state, every day, the source tree like sort of snapshot it every day. So if you want to follow along, we are on day 27, so unzip day 26's source code, because that is what I am starting with. You always start with the previous day. So unzip day 26's, and you will be starting exactly where I am starting right now. Okay, so first things first, let's go to the little diagram. I did a bunch of talking yesterday just to kind of get everyone on the same page about what architecture is and that sort of stuff. And today I want to talk very briefly, maybe spend about 10 minutes here, talking about how we go about doing architecture. Because yesterday I basically just tried to get across the fact that a lot of the things that typically happen with crazy like upfront architecture and all that stuff is basically like a confusing and perhaps non-productive way to go about things. So I kind of wanted people to understand what sort of the, what the basic concepts of architecture are, and sort of like how to approach it, how to think about it, frame it in your mind. But we didn't actually do any architecture yesterday or any sort of work like that, and I didn't really explain how we would go about that. So today I basically want to just take the first part of the stream to kind of explain that part of it, and then start doing it. So basically we'll sort of say what we're trying to do and how I think about the process of doing it, and then we will do it. And then this will be a process that continues for like essentially the entire length of the stream, where we're constantly sort of thinking about, as we do more code, how it slots into the architecture, how we might want to change the architecture, how we need to revise things, that sort of stuff. Okay. So I want to introduce a concept here. I guess if you've watched my lecture on API design, then you kind of already know this. But I'm just going to say it here on the stream because a lot of people probably haven't seen that. So what I want to talk about here is just a mental model for understanding the way that projects develop over time. And what I want you to do is put on your imagination cap, your little like fantasy, like unicorns running around and trolls under bridges and I don't know, a winged Pegasus, certainly. Obviously those would be there, as would a griffin. Imagine that fantasy land that we call project state space. And I know it sounds a little fancy, but all I want to do is basically just have a geometric representation, just some totally abstract representation of basically saying you are here on a project. So day 0 of a project, which is essentially what we're at here. We made a prototyping layer, it's self-contained, so we can pretty much think of today as like the starting point for the actual game. Like the engine of the game and the game itself, that is what we're starting today. So essentially you can think about it as like kind of this project state space as a like you are here kind of a thing, where we have absolutely nothing. We have nothing, right? And in our imaginary project state space, there is some like end state up here, right, which is what we will ship, right? So there's some, you know, imaginary geography of projects and the state of the project, what's in it and how it's designed and all that stuff, where we start somewhere and we go and we end up somewhere else, right? And that somewhere is the finish. That's the full-on completed project. Now, as anyone who's ever done a project knows, but of course some people are maybe doing projects for the big project for the first time on this stream, but you know, a lot of people probably have experience with.
Obviously pre-watched. I know what he's about to do and start trying to draw lines to go to, excuse me, get from where you start off in a project to get to the thing that you actually want to ship. And it's so hard to know where that shipping dot is. Like, for the sake of the way that he's presenting this, like, you have to put a point somewhere, but the whole point of it is you don't know what you're shipping a lot of the time until you've made a bunch of stumbles to get to that point. And that's where a lot of like things like agile development, agile software development, and all these other different kinds of methodologies that people want to apply to try and we want an empirical way to find where that dot is so we can just build exactly the thing we need, but we're tripping over ourselves all the time to figure out where the hell that dot is on the map of where we want to go.
Some kind of programming, if they're following the stream, you know that it doesn't look like a straight path, right? It's not like you start with nothing, day 0. You know, this is day 0 of your project, and this is day, you know, who knows what, 700 or something, right? And you're talking about, okay, it's a linear path. Every day I do a little bit of work, I get.
It would be so great if it was only 700 days. Sometimes, you know, it could be many more. It could be twice that much. It could be 3 times that much. You never know, depending on what you're doing.
Closer to that.
There was that game that just came out, right? Concord or something for Sony. They spent, what was that? Like 40 million? Was it 40? Or was it 40 billion? It was some outrageous number. Many zeros at the end of it. And like 8 years of development. And the thing that they delivered, nobody wanted to play.
Ship state, and I'm just done. That's not at all how projects tend to go. If you think about how projects go, there's a lot of this sort of thing that happens, right? Like, you know, there's all sorts of meandering, and you go around and you know, you make changes that maybe get you even further away, and that was a mistake, and you kind of come back and that sort of stuff, and eventually you end up at the ship thing. But it's not this perfect line of sight. At day 0, you often don't even know what this thing looks like, right? You don't have a perfect vision for exactly what the code you're going to ship looks like. You have nothing, and you have a vague idea of what it probably looks like. But if it's a project of any complexity, if it's not, you know, Hello World, you probably don't really have.
I realized too late that I didn't have him on 1.5 times speed. If I'm going to get through this stuff in any sort of efficient time scale, I need to play him back and fast forward. So he's going to be like a speedy Casey Gonzalez here. Yeah, like for me, sometimes even this going forward and then kind of doubling back. Like sometimes you're so far away from, you start off and your ideas are so far wrong that the thing that you will ultimately want to ship is up here, but you actually start off just going backwards, and you're going backwards because you're investing all this time and energy and resources into just making the complete wrong ass thing because you had a bunch of assumptions and you had no reason to believe those assumptions were false. And then we finally discover, oh, all that was wrong, and we can start, actually going the direction we want to go in. That trail that you go on, it's like, thankfully our lives don't depend upon it, but if they did, a lot of us would be starving and dying out in the wilderness because of this exact problem he's describing here.
An idea of what that actually looks like. So what I want to talk about on this diagram is just how to conceptualize what you are doing every day in that drive towards ship as far as architecture is concerned, and even to some degree as far as just individual pieces of code are concerned, because really the code and the architecture, it's a blurry line there. Like, what's the architecture, what's the code? They're really just what level we're talking about, whether we're talking about the fine grain or whether we're talking about the coarse grain of how the code operates. So it's almost a continuum at some level. So what I want to talk about is the fact that when you are at a particular time, it doesn't have to be day 0, it could be any day. Like, we could be somewhere a little further along, maybe we're on day 100 or something like this, right? At any given point, you can basically think about what you're going to do as picking, as driving towards some new location in the state space. And you don't actually know where this is. You don't know the actual ending location of this, right? You just have some vague notion, and maybe you have a range. You're like, oh, I think the thing we want to ship kind of looks a little bit like something that would be in here, right? But you don't actually know where that final destination is. So, you might aim for something over here, and then when you start to kind of get towards it, maybe you realize that what you really needed was the thing that you end up shipping, right? And you kind of end up back over there or whatever, right? So you don't really know. There's like a vague idea of what you're trying to get to. You have some conceptions in your head, but especially if it's something that you haven't done a lot before, you don't really know. And this could be a very wide and amorphous thing you're aiming towards, and it kind of shrinks down over time. As you get closer to it, you can start to sort of see, oh, it looks narrower and narrower where I'm actually aiming for. But at first, it could be very broad. You may have no idea really where that final piece of what that final structure looks like. So on any given day, what you're sort of doing is you're doing like a dead reckoning and going, okay, from where I'm at now, and given the code that I'm trying to write right now, whatever it is, like maybe I'm trying to upgrade the object system because it can't handle some of the things that we want it to do in the design right now, or it's really inefficient, we're trying to optimize it, who knows? So we're trying to do something. And what you're doing at that point, when you sort of sit down and start coding for the day, is you're driving towards some new point, right, in this state space. You're kind of like going towards something depending on what you decide to do that day. And then when you finish that step, however much that takes, you're going to be at a new point, and you're going to do the same thing again. You're going to choose to do something, and that something drives you in a direction. And in that way, you kind of build this path that sort of meanders towards ship. And the better you are with your dead reckoning, the sort of less wasted work, the less switchbacks there are on this path, the less of that kind of thing is happening. But that's basically what's going on here. So the reason, again, that I think that just to sort of cement what's going on here, the reason that I really like, again, compression-oriented programming, where we just kind of like write code, see how it works at the low level, and then sort of loft it up into designs as we go, and not try to do a whole lot of pre-planning, is specifically because pre-planning assumes you know what this thing looks like already. You know what the code is going to look like. Because think about it. If you have to do a bunch of planning on how the code will go the whole way, you basically have to say, I know where this is, and I'm making the waypoints along the way that we're going to go to for the design, right? If you don't know what this is, there's really no way to do these, right? So usually what happens when people do a lot of upfront design is they pick totally wrong stuff. They're like, okay, this is our path, guys. It's going to be great. We just go to here, and then we go to here, and then we go to here, then we go to here, and then we ship it, right? And what you do is you end up going to there, doing it, and you do it, and you're like the whole way you're like, this doesn't feel right. Okay, things are getting pretty janky. And by the time you get to here, you're like, this is a disaster. Like this code is awful. We're fighting the design of the architecture the whole way. And either you end up shipping something that's kind of crappy and not even close to what probably would have been optimal, or at some point you realize your mistakes and you try to start course correcting, right?
I didn't think I'd have so much to say just in these first 15 minutes, but I mean, the problem can look so much more. I mean, this was 10 years ago too when he did these videos, and the problem can just look so much more grotesque. Instead of it being this 2D thing, like you're going through 3 dimensions of bad decision making, or much more than that, and you just arrive at a place where, in order to course correct to get to that place you want to be at, there's so much that has to happen, and like all you know is that you actually have messed up. You still don't know. All you know is that you've been going in the wrong direction. That doesn't necessarily, I mean, I guess that means we can backtrack and go, I don't know. It's such a difficult problem to track. Santos, Ninsky, and Devil, thanks for popping in. Good to hear from you.
So upfront design is basically putting in waypoints on this map, but you're putting in waypoints when you don't know the destination, and that just doesn't work, right? It just plain doesn't work. So what I want to encourage, and the way we will be approaching everything, and we have already been approaching things this way to a large extent, although like I said, it was kind of cheating on the platform layer because I've done it so many times, I kind of know what the end result is, so I do really know what this is, so I could kind of set waypoints. And like I said, that just isn't an interesting architectural problem because that's more like just cut and pasting from your brain. It's not even waypoints, it's just I know what it is and I'm gonna write it, right? So the much more interesting architectural thing and the skills that I hope to show and encourage you to develop over the course of the stream is what to do when you haven't written the thing before. that's the hard thing. That's where the real architecture work exists. Because if you've already written it many times before and you totally know exactly how you want to do it, then that's not architecture. That's just it's regurgitation, and it's good. I mean, it's great to go into something and go, you know what, I know exactly how to do this. Just bam, there it is, right? That's always great. But that's not being a code architect, because you were the code architect. You were doing that before when you learned how to do it, right? And so what I want to talk about or not what I'm talking about. What we're going to constantly sort of focus on as we go through the stream and have opportunities to do so is focusing on how to actually do this process much more efficiently. And again, what I want to encourage is not to set those bogus waypoints, not to look too far ahead. So what we are constantly going to do is we're constantly going to basically take a sort of an explore and then lock approach. We're basically going to do the opposite of that waypoint. Instead of picking a set of things that we think are the directions to go, right, which may turn out to be wrong ahead of time, instead what we're going to do is we're going to take our space, wherever it is, we're going to explore around the space, and we're going to see what we find in that space. When we find something that we feel is along the path to shipping, we will lock that in and make that our new location, and then we will repeat the process, right? So we're constantly going to, I don't know why that just went crazy there. So we are constantly going to look at things as this two-stage process that repeats itself over and over, which is start from where we are, do explorations that are just us writing whatever code comes to mind for the thing that we need to implement. So if we need a tile map today or whatever it is, we're just going to try just flat coding a tile map with no thought to the architecture whatsoever. It's going to do whatever comes to mind. We're going to explore and see what works in the code. When we find something that we are happy with, that we think worked pretty well, we'll lock that in, we'll call that the point that we're going to start from now, and then we'll start on the next problem. And in that way, what we hope to do is basically assume that there is, sort of a gradient along the path to shipping, that you can learn to sense as you gain good programming skills, that you can learn to sense when architectures are good and bad, and you can basically say that there's kind of this trough that goes to shipping, right? There's like a hill climb you can do, where you can basically say that like this appears to be good when we look at the code, and this is like okay, and this is maybe fair, and this is like bad, and this is like object-oriented over here or something. Okay, I'm kidding, object-oriented people, I'm sorry, I joke at you a little bit. There's bad, and then there's, just awful is over here or whatever, right? And so I guess what I'm saying is that what we will assume is that generally, as you become a better programmer and have more experience with code in general, you will learn how to do this sort of sensing of where you are so that you can pathfind to these things, even though you don't know the destination, by doing an exploration and accepting step, right? Such that when you do architectures that are new that you've never done before, for things that you've never done before, you can still leverage all of the experience you've had doing other things to get you to a good point, right? And so that's kind of the model I want you to think about in your head. I don't think you can do waypoints for an architecture you've never done before. I've never seen it work, and I just don't think it probably does. But what you can do is once you've had some experience programming, you can learn to sense the gradient. You can learn to sense where you are, and you can constantly kind of course correct to stay in that trough of good design all the way to the end. So that you minimize the degrees out into the bad areas that you would have had if you predefined your waypoint to be here and drove towards it and just had disaster zone the whole time, right? So this is how I want you to conceptualize what we are doing. As this project state space, it's got a channel to good, right? And our goal is to constantly sense whether we are in the channel to good. And when we sense ourselves going outside it, we're just going to have to course correct back in and make sure that we stay there, okay? Now, of course, this is all hypothetical. This is all just my experience of programming talking. No one has ever proved or analyzed any of this thing. Nobody who ever does design ever proves or analyzes anything, unfortunately. So we have no formalism to back us up, but neither does anyone else. And so all I can say is, in my experience, this has been the truest thing I have ever found in terms of how to conceptualize developing the structure of code. So
I love how honest that is. That is such an honest thing that he's saying there, which is like, you know what? This is what's historically worked very well for me in my career. And there's nothing empirical that I can point to and say this is why this works, but nobody else has any such thing either. And if they're claiming they do, they might be selling you a grift. And I will say too that as my career has advanced, I have gotten a better sense for what that trough looks like, that evolution of where like it feels like I've got a very nice narrow understanding of where things need to go. I don't know exactly what things will look like, and it goes back to what I said the other day about how I made a terrible architectural decision years ago with my startup, and I'm only just coming around to completely absolving myself of that sin today. I'm this close to just completely fixing this mistake that I wish I had the expertise, the experience to be able to look at and be like, no, this is a bad idea. You just do it this way or that way. You're trying to combine two things that don't fit together for what you want to have happen in the end, and it just created so much pain. I learned a lot from it, and what I learned is that I shouldn't do it that way, unfortunately. But some lessons are learned harder than others.
with that in mind, let's get started on things. I'm going to quickly say sort of what our goals are for our game engine at this point, just in general. Because since you guys don't know what the game design is and I do, now is the time for me to kind of sort of say a little bit about that. Now, I want to say...
This is reminding me of the shit architecture we're stuck using in a Salesforce project. Yeah, somehow Salesforce gets involved no matter what you do, and the way that it gets involved in creates some kind of pain in one way or another. And, you know, Salesforce is a company that makes all this money, right? And, you know, with all the customers they have, you'd think they're doing a good job. So if that's what doing a good job looks like, you know, is where you still have all of these pain points in dealing with a product or a service, it gives you an idea for how terribly complex and difficult it is to wrangle these problem spaces that we have to deal with.
Save a lot of the game design stuff for a little later on. I want to keep most of things a surprise, but what I will say is I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of how the game looks and plays so that we can understand what we are building in terms of an engine to support it, right? So I've mentioned Legend of Zelda in the past, and I am a big fan of the original Legend of Zelda, and I mean like original, like the one that was on the Nintendo Entertainment System that you played with one of those little controllers that looked like a rectangular brick. I'm a big fan of it because it basically just dropped you down in a world that had a lot of richness and interest in it, but it didn't give you any constraints or dictates about what you were trying to do. There wasn't like this, you know, little fairy that shows up like there are in later Zeldas who's like, don't go into that forest yet because you're not ready to go there. First go help the blacksmith smite his, you know, make his smith his little sword, and you go to the blacksmith. The blacksmith's like, I would love to smith the sword, but I can't because I don't have any water for my wheel. And then the fairy pops up and goes, we should get him water for his wheel. Like, those kind of ruin Zelda for me, and I can appreciate the fact that game design is obviously a personal preference, so there's probably lots of people who like that sort of thing, and that's fine. So I don't want to say that that's bad. And like I said, I'm a game designer, so I'm not trying to tell you anything about that from any kind of objective standpoint. But personally, that really ruined the Zeldas for me, and I don't even play them anymore. Because what I liked about that very original one, that very first Legend of Zelda, was that sort of that feeling of exploration that you get when you really just have no idea what's coming next, and you know you have this freedom to explore and think about what you wanted to do on your own. And so that is the sort of core concept that I want in the game design. That is the main thing that I'm going for. And I want to kind of, since Legend of Zelda is a very classic game written in the classic style, there, you know, obviously it was a cart game on a very limited system, I think it's kind of appropriate for Handmade Hero to look to that as kind of a model. What I sort of want to do is go, okay, what would we do though if we wanted to kind of modernize everything that goes on in one of those kind of old games where I have the, you know, sprite guy who walks around a tile map and walks off the top of the screen and walks onto like another screen and can explore the map and so on. What would we do if we want to modernize all of that stuff, but still stay true to sort of the feeling, the positive feelings of exploration, and sort of the no hand-holding approach and all that sort of stuff? So basically, that's the game design that I've been working on, and that you know, again, I'll be sort of talking about more later as we start to talk about actual specifics of game design. But what it implies for our engine is I want a bunch of things that are going to support me in making that kind of experience. So what I do want to do, right, is I want to have a way for us to basically make a tile map kind of a thing, right? I want to be able to make screens that are like the old Zelda that have like a tile map on them, right? Where we have stuff like, you know, this is a water tile, and this is a land tile, and this is, you know, a shopkeeper or whatever, and everything, you know, and this is grass or something, I don't know, right? I want to be able to make that kind of a game where it has that feel of the old sort of classics, but I don't really want to have to do tile mapped graphics, right? I feel like tile map graphics are possibly something that doesn't really need to be preserved from the old days. I think that that was mostly just because that's what they could do. I don't think that necessarily needs to be in a modern game design for the game design to be good, right? I do, however, think there's something perhaps important about the tile map design. Like, the player understanding that they are on a tile map, and that, like, if this tile is blocked, and this tile is blocked, and there's a pushable thing here, that, you know, they can push it this way and it ends up here. That, like, leads to important understanding of puzzles, and it simplifies things in the mind of the player in a way that's kind of important, where if I just said, okay, scrap the whole tile map thing entirely, and we're just going to have a free-floating world, you know, where everything is just at random X and Y position, so if there's something to push, it's here. I just don't feel like that has worked as well. I feel like there's something concrete and gamey that gets lost when you try to go a little too far in the direction of completely generic. So basically, what I am going to try and design our engine to do...
I never played much of the really old Zelda games. I remember I had a Game Boy Zelda game that was in this style that he's talking about, but what he's talking about reminds me specifically of like pushing boulders around in the old Pokemon games, and I think that's kind of gone away. Maybe I'm wrong. I know you still have to use, what were they called, HMs, like hidden moves, right? So like for the old ones, like you needed fly to be able to fast travel, and you needed cut to like get through like a cuttable tree branch and that sort of thing. It has pretty much gone away. Yeah, that's what I thought. I bought the remake of the original Zelda for the GBA, and I loved it. I think that must have been the Zelda that I remember playing on Game Boy Advance. I just have such a bad memory of it. I remember being so bad at that game, though, that I just could not get through it. But Pokemon, what he's talking about, like, that gamey sense of like I'm pushing a boulder around and I can get a feel for like I'm in a grid and it's just intuitive to solve a puzzle because I know that the boulder can only move in one of 4 directions, right? And I'm not moving it like slightly up and diagonally, and that you're dealing with all of this like really kind of quirky sort of geometry that you're trying to figure out in your head as the player. I get what he's saying. I just don't, I'm not experienced enough to really speak to it any more than that.
Is to create a playable game on a tile map, but where the tile map is not rendered directly as a tile map. It's rendered as something a little more flexible than a tile map that just then takes sort of the shape of a tile map, but so that you don't see like big obvious repeating tiles where it's like, okay, here's the like one tree that we had and here's the tree again, right, or whatever. So something that looks a little more flexible, maybe even has a little bit of smoothing around it so it's not 100% hard when I walk into these things, but that still can preserve the properties of a tile map where the gameplay logic is kind of operating on the tile map for a certain set of objects anyway. Like maybe there are some objects, I mean, well, we know there are, because even the original Legend of Zelda, for example, your character could move not aligned with the boundary, right? So pushable objects had to stay on the tile map, but the character didn't have to, right? And so we will allow certain things to just kind of be free, floating around as necessary. Those will probably be like enemies and the main guy or whatever. But then we want to be able to kind of have this concept of a tile map that's understandable to the player so that they can see it and we can base sort of gameplay things on the tile map that are easy to understand for a player and easy to execute, right? So I want that. That is the basic thing that we're going to be doing. So we need to basically construct something that allows us to have, a tile map underneath, right? That can be rendered. It has to have, stuff that moves around, moves on top, right? Moves on tile map. Tile map. So we need those things, obviously. And so that's a very traditional thing, but we're also going to do kind of like a fancy renderer, right? Or a fancy compositor, however you want to talk about it. We're going to get fancier here. So these may be a little traditional. These will be like basically upgraded versions of exactly the kinds of stuff you would have seen in a NES game or a SNES game, where we'll probably do a better job than they could have because they had a lot more limited resources. But this part will be a complete departure. So when we get to how we're actually going to present the visuals, we'll go in a totally different direction than they ever would have or could have, for that matter. So we want to do that. And what I would like to do is I would like to make this game totally procedural. So I want everything to be generated by essentially an algorithm of some kind that will produce totally new worlds every time. So I want it to be the case that essentially, for the most part, nothing that we do will ever be like a hard-coded screen. There will never be like screens, unless they're just like the starting screen or the ending screen, some very specific screens that we want to hard code for some reason. For the most part, every last little thing should be procedural, such that when you play it, you are seeing a new map every time that you go in.
That is not something, well, I want to learn how to do that, the procedural generation, just because I think that's a good thing to learn, good learning exercise to figure out how that sort of stuff gets done in games. But I'm more interested in like the handcrafted, like very narrow approach of like you have an environment, it's all sculpted and it's meant to look a certain way and feel a certain way as you're exploring it, and you're meant to get a specific, like there's intent. If I think, long down the road, like what kind of game am I trying to design, it's probably going to be more in that handcrafted style. But, learning how to do things procedurally is certainly, not going to hurt my experience. So that's why, like everything, I'm by following the series, I'm forced to do things exactly the way he's doing them. But by learning how to do all the things that he's doing the way he's doing them, it's going to give me insight into how to do these other things, right?
Okay. So I want to do that. And when I say that, also, again, have I learned anything? Let's see if I've learned anything. I want to try and clear out just this one region. We'll see if my working with Krita yesterday has paid off at all. Can I do like just draw around here? Hey, we're getting pretty good here, people, wouldn't you say? I think so. All right, so what I wanted to talk about, in addition to that should hopefully be pretty obvious what we're trying to do here, right? So nothing particularly confusing about these goals. Maybe this fancy renderer thing may be pretty confusing to implement because we're kind of maybe blazing a little bit of a new trail there with some of the things that I'm thinking about trying to do. But on the whole, hopefully this is pretty understandable. We want a totally procedural, tile map-based world. We want stuff to move on top of the tile map and interact cleanly with it. We want a renderer that's much fancier so that the thing doesn't look like a tile map. It looks, kind of more organic and nice and pretty, but that's still understandable as a tile map to the player so that they can understand puzzles that are based on the tile map or things like this. Okay, so the totally procedural part, I would like to basically maintain the sort of Zelda-style conceptualization of a game world. So I would like to have an overworld map, right, which you walk around on, and then I would like dungeons that are in there. So I want to be able to generate something that essentially produces some kind of overworld map with these out of tile map portions, out of which you're viewing a small one. You're viewing this one at a time, and when you walk off the end of it, you come on to the next one, right? I want to be able to do that, and on certain locations on here, right, I want you to be able to enter something that will then be a dungeon map that has another map that you kind of walk around on, that sort of stuff. Now, I'm not sure exactly what tack I want to take, but I believe, so I'm going to put this up here because this is what I would like to try, first of all, because I don't think there's any reason not to. So I'm just going to write it down here. I want to try and make a completely consistent space, however. So rather than this map and the dungeon map being separate, essentially, I want them to all be the same. So when you come here, right, and there won't be like this dungeon that's, you know, tons of screens long and wide that just happens to all occupy like one space on the map. It'll actually be something where like you go down, you know, a ladder or a tunnel, you go down into the dungeon through the entrance, and the dungeon is actually like underneath. So the dungeon tiles actually are underneath the actual real map. So these are like happening below, right? And it could be many levels deep, let's say. But, you know, they could come back up. So there could be like another entrance to it here. And if you went into this entrance and followed it through and came out, you would actually be in exactly the same space that you would think you would be on the world map. So I kind of want, I want to kind of make the space be 100% spatially consistent. So there's never like any kind of a unrealistic shrinking or expanding of what a tile is. Tiles should always be the same size, and they all have to actually fit where they are. And so the only time that I would want to break that is if we had some kind of magical thing we were like, if we were going to break that, it would have to be inside of some magical context where it was clear that it was supposed to be broken, right? And so furthermore, I want basically no dimension limits. This is a pretty important one to talk about. So basically, I don't want to have to say that the whole map or something fits inside, you know, something that's 256 screens by 256 screens by 256 screens or something, and it's like a giant voxel array or anything like this, right? I don't want there to be a dimension limit. There could be a dimension limit that's just impractical. Like say if it was, you know, 4 billion by 4 billion by 4 billion or something. I'm okay with that if that's a limitation, because we know that the player could never walk across 4 billion things. So I'm okay with basically a limitation if it's never something we could ever possibly hit. But I'm not okay with the limitation of something like this. So we're not going to do anything where we'd have to like pack coordinates into something that would only fit in a 32-bit integer or any of this. We're not going to allow anything that would restrict our ability to basically create worlds that are as large as we want, with the restriction being that it's okay if we know that a single continuous line from one end to the other is longer than a player could ever hope to walk in less than a week of continuous play or something, right? So if we can determine that, then I'm okay with that limitation. But I'm not okay with any limitations that might actually constrain how the world gets generated in a practical sense.
It's interesting to think about this approach that he's talking about. I understand it more intuitively now that I've done a decent chunk of the series before, but I'm trying to think of basically what he's saying, right, is that like all of the geometry of the world, it's all connected in memory, and like if you can start from one coordinate in the beginning of the world and go all the way to the furthest other end of the game world, and it's all just continuous, and you have all of that geometry just together, right? Like you could draw a line from one point to the other, versus like you have a bunch of different scenes or levels that you then load the player into that are all segmented, right? And I guess like I'm trying to think of like other examples of games. Like if you think about a game like The Last of Us, right, where every single sequence of the game is segmented. You've got like the beginning section in Boston, and then you get to Philadelphia, right? And then you're in Colorado. Like all of these are individual segments, and you can't backtrack because that's not really the way the game is even presented to you. But versus like Skyrim, where you've got the open world, or Elden Ring, like the world is all continuous, right? And it all loads in as you're progressing through the game world. But then you go inside of some places that are like dungeons, and they are segmented off. But the way he's describing it, it's all actually connected. Like even the dungeons, like a good example of this in the way to think of it is like in Elden Ring, when you fall down that chasm in the I can't remember the name of the castle, but it winds up connecting to the volcano. Just that sense of like this whole world is connected, like it's a real world that you're exploring, because instead of it being broken into these pieces, you get a real sense for like I'm just exploring a whole different universe, and it doesn't feel, there's not that disconnect. I'm not hitting a loading screen, right, when I go into Whiterun. And I think that's kind of the advantage that he's speaking to, when you do have the whole game world kind of continuously existing in memory. But that's just my layman's understanding of what he's talking about here.
Okay. So I think that's mostly everything we need to start going in and working on the actual game. I don't think there's much more that I need to say about it. But basically, this is a pretty straightforward, concrete specification of what I want to do. I want to make it so we can generate the world. I don't want there to be really any constraints on how we generate the world, so we can generate giant worlds if we want to, and do whatever we want. Especially since it's procedural, if we want to for some reason say, please generate me this insanely huge world, we could do that. So I want to allow that, and I want it to be a consistent space, so there's everything kind of fits together. And I want them to kind of base on an underlying tile map that just isn't rendered like a tile map. I want to be able to have a bunch of things that happen on top of on top of that tile map, and then I want it to be totally procedural. Now, because this is well, both because I want this in the game, and I think it'll be cool as a general thing, but also because this is a series about teaching you how to program complex architectural issues. I also obviously, and we don't need to sort of get into this now because it'll be a little further down the road, but eventually the core game engine, I want to support like sort of an insane level of combinatorics. And what I mean by that is all of the things in this world, whether they're tiles or the things that move on top of the tiles, whatever is anything that's interactive in any way. I basically want it to be extremely combinatorially rich, such that anything that you can, any property that you can imagine about that thing can be dealt with in a consistent way that interacts with other properties. So for example, if there's such a thing as a monster who has a brain, any monster that's like actually has a brain of some kind, right, that's walking around or whatever, and there are things that have effects like fear or whatever, right? I always want you to be able to, if there should be a reason why the monster got hit with something that should cause them fear, I want them to become fearful. And this should work entirely through the pipeline in the sense that if for some reason we eventually give you something that's like a scepter that allows you to cast spells on a tile in the environment, and the scepter can be loaded with gems, and this gem is a fear gem, then if you load the fear gem into the scepter and you cast you do a cast with the scepter onto the tile, it should put fear on the tile, and if the monster walks into the tile, he should become fearful. And if there's cross effects where like anybody who's both fearful and weak suddenly just runs away immediately or something like this, then that should happen to him if he was a creature who was already had weakness, those sorts of things. Right? So we're going to be focusing on combinatorics a lot because they are the hardest thing to program in a game engine by far. And
I think what he's talking about too is part of what gives a game like Skyrim so much appeal, right? Because you can just start casting fear and panic or fury on random NPCs in town. Like anything that's like alive in the world, you can mess with it, you can stun it, and then it'll just, go stiff as a board and fall over or whatever. That's what made like Oblivion so much fun too. Like all of those Elder Scrolls games. I know that's just the example I'm always going to go to is like Skyrim can kind of do kind of what he's talking about, but I don't know that that's what he has in his head when he's thinking about examples of games that do that sort of thing. I don't know if there's I don't know if he really alludes to too many other games other than, he brings up Zelda because that's just like the old style Zelda games are just like the core inspiration for the way he's trying to do this game. But unrelated, but also maybe related, the most recent Pokemon game didn't have a whole lot of buildings you could actually go into in the big main city, and as someone who loved going into every house and invading their privacy in the old Pokemon games, it was something I really miss. Yeah, it doesn't feel like you're exploring a world that's really alive, right? Like you want to feel like you're connecting with this big environment that's alive and it's got its own personality and all these things. And if you have all these buildings but there's nothing in them or nothing interesting about them, why put them there at all? It's just an art asset at that point.
So not only do I think they make for very interesting games, but I also think that they're going to make for a very interesting programming. And so watching me have to deal with a lot of those combinatorics, I think is mostly what I want to have happen in the later stages of working on this game. And so we're going to focus on that a lot, but we're not probably going to get to that real soon. We want to try and focus on generating worlds that we can walk around in first just to get ourselves up and running, and so that we have something to use to drive our renderer design. First, but once all that stuff is working, then we will kind of move on to the actual game development, game design side of things, and this will really be where we're spending almost all of our time. Will be on here. Okay, so how am I going to approach this? Like I said, remember the diagram that I drew earlier today where we're in a space and we're kind of trying to explore around it. So I know that's what I'm going for. I know that I have this in my head. I'm like, I can sort of see the game that I want to make, right? But I have no idea what the code looks like at the end. I've never made even a Legend of Zelda clone, let alone a completely new game whose design is very different from something like Legend of Zelda that just happens to be in the same genre, which is what we're making here. And certainly Legend of Zelda had none of that combinatoric stuff really, so that's all totally new as well. So we just have a ton of stuff that's totally unknown at this point, and I don't have a plan for how I'm going to write it at all. And I don't even have a plan. I don't even know how I want to do this tile map stuff. I can, I again have a lot of experience programming lots of different things, so I could brainstorm right now a number of ways that we could imagine implementing tile map stuff and all that sort of thing. So that's certainly true, but I haven't written like 50 games that are like this before, and where I can sit down and say, look, I know what works, I know what doesn't work, you do it like this. I don't have that for most of the things in this game, and so I am in that position that I was talking about on the original diagram. Day 0, we're not sure where the shipping code is or what it looks like, right? And so I'm going to do exactly the thing that I said. We're going to start here on day 0 with nothing. We're going to start by exploring around the space by just looking at what it takes to implement basic versions. How do I get a rectangle moving around on a tile map? How do I make a tile map that's got rectangles that are like colored by what kind of tile they're supposed to be? How do I move from one screen to the next screen and like change which one I'm on? Let's just go try it. We'll see what starts to emerge, and we will let sort of the architecture work itself up from there, so that each time we sort of get something that feels like it's working pretty well, we'll say, okay, that is how we'll lock that down. All right. So that's about it for the drawings, I think. Let's clear that out. And let's start. We've got about a half hour left, roughly, and so we should be able to do, probably not a whole lot, but we should be able to do a little bit of coding here to get ourselves started. So I did remember there was one thing that we never passed to the...
Okay, finally we get to writing some code, like, live with him. This could be really painful to get started, but hopefully I'll get into a groove and it'll be okay. Actually just occurred to me, I might actually be able to code while I'm looking at the chat. That could be terrible, or it could be a great idea. I don't know. Because that way I can see, like, if I'm working on something and either Casey or myself are blocking the thing of concern. But it's not that important because nobody's watching this to copy me. They should be watching Casey to not copy him, but learn, code alongside him to learn how to do the things that he's doing live on stream. So it's probably not that important that I'm blocking code, but anyways, probably just thinking too much about it. Let's just write some code.
Game loop, by the way, that we wanted, which I don't know if we actually need to use it at all today, but we might. I wanted to mention that, I don't know if you remember when we were doing the Win32 coding, we did like the target game, there's like a target seconds per frame thing that we computed, this thing right here, which is how much the game was going to update by every frame. We never actually passed that value to the game. Like the game has this game input thing, and we even have the to-do, insert clock values here, and we never did it. So we want that thing, right? We want, target seconds per frame. We basically want seconds to advance, right?
I don't know if that seconds to advance name is what he ultimately goes with, but what he's saying is that this right here never gets passed off to the game state, right? So if I go to game, or I just think I call it state in here. Not button state, it's just state. There we go. And it's just a plain old struct. Oh no, that's input. Okay, input to the game, so it's the input. And is that the name he goes with?
Over time step, or over update. We basically want to pass that value there because that is the thing that's actually going to let the game...
Is that really the name that he goes with? Good lord. That is a long name. And he's making it a float. Over update. I mean, that is such a long member name. Seconds to advance over update, I guess.
Be run at any frame rate you want. So I'm gonna go ahead and just pass it. Like I said, we've already got it. We did all the work. We just, I don't know, probably just because we had so much stuff we were looking at, and doing audio and video and all these sorts of things bouncing around. We probably just, I'm sure it just slipped my mind. I was like, because we, like I said, we computed it, we put in the timing code, and then we never actually bothered to ever actually do it. So for now, we're just gonna always pass it the same one. So where's our game input written to here? Game input. Okay. So basically, I think all I really need to do is just say new input target seconds per frame. Sorry, target frames for that. So that way we'll just pass that in there, and that's all I really wanted.
All right. It's weird watching stuff, and I'm like, I don't remember having to do this, but I guess it's been so long since I've touched any of that code that's down in the platform layer. Like, I hate that I get OCD about stuff like this, but I just want to call these the same thing. Like, these are the target seconds per frame, so just say, like, it's the same thing that I want to hand over to the input, right? Is there a problem with that? Yeah, it's a very descriptive name. Hey, Derpy, it is going well. This is the first time I'm having to live code with him, and like I'm used to doing this just by myself, but it's different when I'm trying to like talk through it, and I'm learning a little bit of what he had to go through to make this series, to be always talking about what he's programming as he's programming it. But it's just, it feels weird because there is that added layer of like I'm coding alongside him, and then you're watching me, and it's just, maybe it's way too confusing and it like makes no sense to you, but hopefully this is at least, you're seeing like the point that he started this series off on was like, see how somebody else goes through that process of figuring it out. And I feel like I'm trying to like work inside of that, the spirit of that, even though he maybe eventually grew to see it a different way. But I just know I've learned a ton from the amount that I've done of the series so far. And anyway, I'm just going to keep on keeping on here, and we'll see where we wind up.
All right, so I think that's the end of I think that's the end of the things that I was reminded that I was like, we never actually put that in there, and we need it. So what I would like to do now is just take a look at what we've got here and sort of clean this out a bit, because we have a bunch of test code in here that we don't really need anymore, or rather we don't really want to run anymore, because we're currently generating some weird gradient thing. For those of you that have been following along, we were doing like a test pattern on here, right? So we have this sort of we have this thing going on, and that's not at all something that we actually want anymore. So we certainly don't want it to.
That's right, I forgot about the sine wave. I turned off the sine wave before starting this whole thing, but I can turn that back on just for a sec. I'm going to turn the volume on it way down so that it's not... Hopefully that's still loud enough that you can hear it, but the problem is I'm worried that it'll just be way louder than the rest of the stream audio, and then you're just going to, you headphone users will be streaming blood from your ears. So let's just show that off for a second. And what's fun is I can actually control the pitch of it from the controller the same way that he does. That's pretty quiet. Maybe you can't hear that. So as I'm moving up, the pitch is going up. As I'm moving down, the pitch is going down. Kind of just goofy and fun.
Be playing that sort of tone or anything like that. So I'm going to actually say that this is debug game output sound right now. Well, I guess I can even just leave it the way it is because we had a switch in there. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say from now on, let's just output 0, so it should be completely silent. And also, I suppose since we're no longer working on the platform layer, I can actually do, I believe, I can actually just do this from now on, right? I can just leave the game running and then recompile, and it should just magically work. Yeah, perfect. So anyway.
I'm not going to leave the game running just because it's... Whoops, I did not mean to do that. It's always set up to have the game on top of my editor, and I think it should be on top of... Let me actually just verify. Where does this show up? Yeah, it pops up over the top of everything so that if I am messing with the game, you guys can see that too. But, yeah, I don't want to always have that be on because the screen is crowded enough as it is. Lovely song. Yeah, it started putting all these ideas in my head of building a digital audio workstation, but why the hell would I do that? I can just use Ableton and not spend the next 10 years of my life making a bad Ableton clone.
That hot loading DLL thing is so nice. You never have to do anything. It's just always there. And my little guy is still moving around, so everything's good. Yeah, there we go. Oop, not if I drop the controller. It's not good. Come back, Mr. Controller. What happened? Oh, no. Everything is falling over here on the stream. That's no good at all. That's no good. That's no good. All right, there we go. So... all I really need to do here is get rid of our gradients. So the render weird gradient call that we were calling, these we'll just no longer call. We'll get rid of that guy. And so if I do that, well, so I don't like this warning because we're going to have unreferenced local functions. So I think I'm going to turn that guy off if you guys don't mind. 4505 because I have functions that I don't call, and that's just part of life. I might want to call them later. So we're going to say W4505. We're going to say that that's gone too. Yeah. So now in theory,
I don't think I'll actually get that problem. Well, his is actually still... Oh, I see, because he hot reloaded it. So, because he hot reloaded it, the gradient is still on the screen. But because I started fresh, you just see this. And it's just writing over the same buffer over and over again instead of clearing it and writing a totally fresh thing here. But I don't get that error or that warning about using... Basically, what he was talking about just then is why do I have these two? Oh yeah, one for the mouse cursor. We're rendering a player for our little square that I can control with the controller and the keyboard, and then I have another render player call for just rendering the mouse cursor. But what he was saying there, right, is because he got rid of this call to render this gradient, right? The compiler was telling him, hey, you made this whole function and then you're not calling it. But I'm pretty sure, I think that might be a flag that I could add, but by default, the Odin compiler won't tell me that I'm not using a function that I defined.
Yeah, we're not drawing anything, so you can see that the back buffer is not cleared anymore now that I made that change. So...
You can make a shitty tool to make the shitty music for your game. I will make good music instead using a good tool because I don't... It's not that I wouldn't find it fun to write a digital audio workstation, but it's just not... I have to be... It's unrealistic enough that I'm trying to learn how to be a games programmer in my spare time. I don't need to pile on any more onto that than I already have. That's fine, Nutella. I don't think you should feel like you have to rewatch the VOD. It's okay to be lost because I'm in the middle of it and I'll still be lost. So we can be lost together.
I get rid of that thing. We've got the 2 render players there, and it looks like we're still rendering stuff for mouse testing. That's what those were up there in the corner. These guys right here. So we don't need that anymore either. That's not important at all. These guys are sort of showing us the location of, so we don't really care about that. We don't need any of this stuff. This is all showing us the location of, so we don't really care about that. We don't.
He's just getting rid of all of this here. Starting off with a blank slate.
Need any of this stuff. This is all just test code, it looks like. So we have our read entire file stuff. We don't need any of this at all. This just looks entirely not necessary. So that can go away.
Yeah, he's just completely wiping out all of this game code here. So in here where we just write a file to see whether we can write a file. I've been wondering whether, because what he does is he actually feeds these utility functions or procedures to the game as part of the game's memory, I think. He tacks these procedure calls to read and write, but I'm just calling from Odin's standard library, or its core package, the core OS package. And I'm just calling them directly, but I've been wondering, because all this code does is copy a file, right? I've got the file that I'm in, which is what this thing here is. I'm not even sure what this is called. It's a special keyword in Odin that says, give me a handle, give me the name of the file that I'm in or whatever. I don't know if it's a handle actually, or it's the file name. I'm guessing it's the file name. And we read it into memory, and then we just write it out to this other file. So if I go to this test.out file, you see it's exactly the same code that's in here. I'm using the file to write itself out into another file. But what it does altogether is copy, right? So I was thinking, like, should I write the copy procedure once and then give it to the game memory, and then have that might be a fun thing to do if at some point if I wind up for some reason needing to write this out a lot, because this could just be one line, and then I could have it defined in one place and then just have the main program feed it to the game in its memory, and then off we go. Anyway, so he was just wiping that out, and in that case, if no need to redefine it and pass it to memory if we're not using it. If I need to use that again, I'll see about just stuffing that in a procedure pointer and then feeding it into the game's memory. And then there's all of this, which we can just leave initialized to 0, and now I'm caught up.
This stuff can go away. Let's see if there's anything in my game structure here, game state. So these things don't need to be there. None of this stuff needs to be there at all.
Just completely wiping it all out to start from scratch, because he did all of this, right, I keep on prefixing things with game. Maybe I should just go ahead and do that, because it's throwing me off, because he has everything prefixed with game, and I actually do it somewhere up here, right? No, it's just button state. I thought it was game button state. Anyway. Yeah, and he just wipes all of this out, right? So we're starting off with a completely empty game that does nothing and has nothing that it can do.
And then we've also got, really all I'm doing is just cleaning out all the stuff that we had. I can leave this guy in here, obviously, but maybe I'll move him down kind of out of the way, just in case we want to render a weird gradient again. I don't know. Maybe we don't even need that. Let's see.
I'm pretty sure he never touches this code again. What's going on here? Oh yeah, because I've got all this stuff I'm doing with that game state that just got blown out. So we'll stuff this call all the way down here like he does. Never to see the light of day again, just for posterity. But I'm pretty sure that never comes up again.
Anything else? So we got the render player call. We'll probably use that because we'll turn that into a rectangle call. That'll be good. So we have our initialization thing here.
And then he just wipes out that to do. A lot of this just winds up being like not super interesting. What gets interesting is when like he whips out some lighting code in half an hour, and then I'm like, okay, I'm not able to translate this easily because it looks just different enough that I have to actually unpack an understanding of what he's doing, like the conceptual stuff behind it, to be able to just then re-implement it in my own code because it's a completely different language. And that's like what wound up being a lot more fun than I expected when I tried doing it in a totally different language. It meant I had to have a pretty good understanding of what it was he was doing, and it wasn't just rote copying of the code, but sometimes it feels a little rote. Hey, Colossus. From my college courses, I'll say nothing will make you learn more or eat up more of your time than making your own parts of the engine inside of another engine for your game. Oh yeah, people just can basically make a living doing that sort of thing, right? We had programmers need to make a whole new physics engine in Unreal for a project, and it was a huge learning experience, but also stupid and stressful to do. Yeah, because you've got a huge mountain to climb, right, to deliver this thing, and there's a timeline and everything, but nothing will make you more of a badass than fulfilling that end goal, right? Hey, Dode, for the non-coder like me, what are you currently doing? So what I am doing is I am live coding along with Casey. He wrote all this stuff like 10 years ago. Maybe I'll start to catch up at some point, but I don't know if I'll veer off and just start working on my own thing at some point. For now, I'm learning a new programming language, first of all. I'm getting more and more comfortable with it. I've only been writing it for about a month, but the code you're seeing on my editor right now is the Odin programming language. And then over here, he's writing all of his code in C/C++. It's a C-flavored C++. So he's not using any C++ features that he doesn't want to have to use. So I'm basically translating what he's writing over here into a different programming language. And there's a lot of similarities. It's not like it's translating Chinese to English. Like these are very... Odin was inspired by C specifically, and in many ways feels very much, so far, I've only been using it for a month, but so far it feels very much like a very like it's probably the best approximation of what like a better C would look like according to what I've been able to tell. I wrote this series in a different language. I was translating all of this stuff he's doing now into a different language for a few months there. Basically the same thing I'm doing now, but just with a different language. And over time, I just felt more and more I was fighting the language. Not that the language made it really easy to do some things and then really hard to do other things. It was really weird. It was this mixed bag of like, man, this feels so much easier than how it looks like he's dealing with it. But then at other times, it'd be like, wow, he just whipped that out. He did some operator overloading, and now this just works. Whereas I'm dealing with all this weird casting and shit, and like I'm doing like a little bit of meta programming just to get like the same kind of thing. And it's not even like, I don't even know if I want to call it meta programming. I'm doing some compile time type stuff with this feature called comp time in this other language, and it just didn't feel good. Like I want to feel good when I'm programming, and that's ultimately. So I started learning Odin. I turned my attention to Odin maybe 4 weeks ago or so, and I'm really, really liking it so far. I haven't really hit a snag where I was like, damn, this language is, I feel like I'm fighting the language. I haven't hit that point yet, but that could come, that could happen at some point. I don't know yet. But I don't foresee that right now. I don't see anything where I'm like, in fact, I'm excited to use, once I get to a certain point in the series, there are some features of Odin that I'm really excited to use because it's going to make doing things that were a pain in the butt in this other language called Zig just really, really easy. Specifically, the array programming just looks like it's going to be a breeze to use. So I'm looking forward to getting to that point. It's like translating American to British. Yeah, that's a better analogy. That's a closer approximation of what's going on here. So, it's couleur instead of color. It's cool to see you making games now after I grew up watching you play them, even if I understand none of this code. Yeah, I mean, I'm very far away from making an actual game. Just keep that in mind. Like, it takes a long, long time to get from A to B, depending on what you're doing. So there's another guy who does programming content, and his name is Carl Zielinski. He's a pro game dev, and he's also using Odin, and watching him use Odin is what kind of inspired me to start learning the language. But he's using a different library that's vendored into Odin called Raylib, and it makes it really easy to just start building a game from scratch with very little code. And I'll drop him in the chat again. I'll keep plugging this guy over and over again because I really like everything that he's doing. And he's a strong, I'm pretty sure he's a contributor to Odin. I saw him working on some GitHub issues for Odin on stream yesterday and today. So did that work? Did I share the right channel? Yeah, that looks right. So if you go there and you're interested at all in any of this, he's going to be a much better source of education on just like getting up and running and making a simple game than I am. That's not what I'm trying to do right here. I am, I would encourage you, if you're interested in getting really deep, to go and look at what Casey's doing, but I'm not trying to put on an educational stream. I'm just trying to show like a process that I'm going through where I'm learning games programming, and hopefully it's just entertaining at best. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm not hoping to be educational with this at all. It's not that we won't learn things. It's just it'll be a side effect. It's not a goal. And that's always been the way I've done things. It's not that I couldn't do something educational if I really wanted to. It's just that's not what juices me. I just want to do fun stuff.
Controller reading, which I guess we're just going to kind of get rid of these things entirely. Let's see, and we don't need any of this or that. So this is really where we're at, I think, if I'm not very much in error. So this is really
gonna have to back that up for a second. So he just wipes all of the update and render proc out. I'm gonna keep calling them. He'll call them functions. I have to call them procs because that's what they're called in Odin. It's kind of the same thing, but I know I've seen the creator of Odin talk about it, and he feels strongly about this, that they are not the same thing. So we just initialize everything to 0, and we say it's initialized. We're not doing anything with controller stuff, and we're not doing anything with button states and game state, so we'll leave all that blank, and then all of this is going to get ripped out too. And that is pretty close to what he has going on. And then there's the sound. He's probably gonna have to fix the sound too.
Where we're at, I think, if I'm not very much in error. So let's see here. This is now not going to be updated either. And
I don't think I can do this the way he's doing it. So he's just commenting out this here, I believe, because C will let him do that, but I don't think I can just say, man, why is that? There's like weird random spacing that's just off. Is that because I'm so used to looking at my code from far away that I can't tell? I don't think this is going to work. I think it's going to tell me, so I'm just going to comment this out. If I can, do I want to like comment block this sort of thing? I never really know. I didn't have a choice in Zig. Zig doesn't have multi-line comments like this. Odin does. But yeah, and then this is gonna be, yeah, what does he do about it?
And that should be good to go. So game state tone hertz, we'll just go ahead and say that that is just hard locked to 400 or something.
Okay. Instead of going for like a middle C, we're just throwing a random hertz in there, I guess. I could do a middle C just for funsies. Isn't a middle C like 262 hertz? I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna be a little bit different. I'm gonna use a different tone hertz from Casey. Everything else is the same because I'm original. And then he's got that. What did he do with that sine value up here? Yeah, he just ifed that out. So I mean, it just seems kind of pointless to leave that in there. Whoops. Sample value. Yeah, I mean, this just feels kind of pointless. I guess I'll just leave it in there for posterity. I don't like mixing up multi-line. I like to use multi-line comments like for comments, not for just canceling out some code here that we don't want to run. I'm so quirky and original. Yes, I am. Thanks for noticing. Isn't there a term for learning things as you need them? I always found it the best way to learn stuff. I don't know. I don't know if there's a term for that necessarily. I just know for me, so a lot of people would say, go and just build a game and figure out what you need. But I have no idea. Like, there are some things, I don't want to bang my head against the wall trying to figure out how to do animation, right, from scratch, when I can just watch Casey do it, and then I'll have a good intuition about how to approach those kinds of problems without having to, it's just, what's going to be more fun, I guess. And it might be more fun just to figure it out and bang your head against the wall. But I don't know what I don't know. I think that's what it comes down to. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of pain and suffering. I don't want to inflict a whole lot of pain and suffering on myself to learn something that I could have easily learned just watching a series, if that makes sense. I wanted to ask, if your eventual goal is to make your own game, what's your reasoning for learning to make an engine instead of using one that's commercially available like Unity or Unreal? Just because I want to know how the engine works, and I also feel like that gives you a utility in creativity. And if you watch his series, he'll go in depth, and a lot of his motivations for explaining that sort of thing are similar to mine. I want to know how it works, because then, like, I have all the control. A lot of what it boils down to, and this is just my philosophy towards how I like doing things. I think everybody should do things according to whatever, gets their nut, so to speak. If you enjoy tinkering with Unreal and doing things inside of Unreal or Unity or Godot, whatever it is, that's great. And I think you should go and do that and have fun with it and make a game that way. But for me, I want to learn how to build the engine. And obviously there's a whole stereotype around that, right? Where it's like, you're winding up taking a whole lot longer to actually get to a point where you can actually make a game. And I would say it's kind of, I think you have to keep like scope in mind. Like, I'm not going to go and build Skyrim, if that makes sense. Like, I might be able to make a neat 2D pixel art game that has like maybe like a 5-hour playtime. It's about like, what are your expectations for what you're trying to do? If I was going to try and make, like a PAL world, right, then obviously I'd be better served learning Unreal and getting good with Unreal. But that's not my goal. So it all depends on what your motivation is and what you're trying to accomplish.
Game state tone hertz, we'll just go ahead and say that is just hard locked to 400 or something. I don't know. So now we have something that does absolutely nothing. We are back to square one, right?
And I'll see if that's true. I don't know if my stuff will compile here. The not used compiler errors. Game state is declared but not used. Okay, we can do something about this. Well, game update and render. So we can just assign that to nothing and work through those imports. Are we not using any of these? I'm just gonna leave them commented because I'm gonna have to use all of those again at some point, I imagine. Although, yeah, like I guess I do not see the point. So what Casey is going to wind up doing is he's going to write his own math library, right? I have no intention of doing that because there's a limit to what I intend to write from scratch. So I would say that, to your point, I don't want to do everything from scratch. Like I didn't use the Win32 APIs to build the platform layer. I used SDL because then I can immediately run my game. There's no game yet, but I can immediately go run it on Linux. I can run it on Mac OS. I can run it on Windows, right? And I think I can ship it to anything that SDL supports. So I think that applies to Android too. I'm not sure about iOS, but maybe. Even if not, I'm not really intending to ship a mobile game anyways. But so like it doesn't make too much sense to me to encapsulate away all of this stuff because Casey's whole goal is like, I'm not going to do any of this from scratch. We're going to call the operating system APIs directly, and we're not going to use any of the C standard library stuff. I'll use the standard library in Odin because I can't implement that stuff better than the maintainers of Odin can. And if I want to, I can peek the definition for all of this stuff, right? I can learn how all of it works, even if I don't need to. If I'm just curious and I'm like, how does this work on this platform versus this platform? I can go and look at it. I can go read the documentation. It's all about what your priorities are. And I'm not going to write this core functionality of the programming language better than the guys that made the programming language. It already blows my mind that the things that this language can do what it can do. The fact that I can have SDL at my fingertips just because I installed the language, all I have to do is import the vendored SDL2 package right here. And then I get all of the SDL stuff for free. And to me, that is just, there's something so cool about that. If you haven't had to deal with pulling in dependencies and wrangling them so everything just works before, if you haven't had that experience and it's tremendously painful, and not even specific to game stuff, right? Like at my day job and at my startup, all the stuff that I have to do just to get a thing in place to use that dependency, you know, installing languages and libraries and all this stuff. And then that's what's so refreshing about writing Odin so far, is like everything I need is just there in the language. I install the language, I install the language server, and I'm off, and I can do whatever I want if I know how to make it. That's the hard part, you know. Once you get everything working, you gotta know how to make what you actually want to make. So anyway, so we're not doing anything with tone volume apparently, and I guess that's fine. See, C doesn't complain about unused variables, so that's why it's not barking at him, but Odin will. But I think that's just because I have those compiler flags on, and it is so that I don't forget, right? I don't want to forget that I'm not using these variables. Like I could turn those errors off. I could go in here into my build.bat, and you can see vet unused. So there's this vet flag, and I pass it to the compiler, and it encapsulates all these other things. So unused imports, unused variables, those things that I was just fixing by just commenting them out, because I'll come back around and maybe I'll need to use them, maybe not.
And what another thing that I guess I'm not sure exactly what we want to do with, but I
actually should make sure that it runs. I think I compiled it, but I should just get a black screen. All right, did I miss anything? Nightly Degen says, sounds good. I know very little about coding, so the idea of making your own game engine sounds like a daunting task to me, but also fun. Yeah, for me, it's really fun. See, for me, it's just, I really enjoy programming. That's all it comes down to. And that's what I want to do. I get the joy out of the programming, not necessarily the making of the game. So, look, I might get far enough along and be like, maybe I'll make like a toy game, but I'm not gonna like aspire to make like a production game that I'll go and ship and sell for like $10 or $15 a copy. That's not necessarily where I think this winds up. Maybe it does. Maybe I get that into the game design aspect of things, that to the point where that's what I want to do. But at the very minimum, what I think I'd like to do is just make like a free game that anybody can download and play, even if it's just like an hour-long little really encapsulated thing. It's just about, you know, what are your expectations? And like Devil said, I just want to be a rock star, because games programmers they're rock stars, man, through and through.
Probably think about, just in terms of when we're starting to do testing here, I should probably think about what resolution we want this game to run in. With 3D games, you don't really have to think very hard about what resolution you're going to run in, because everything is always resampled, right? You're mapping polygons, you're mapping textures onto polygons and that sort of stuff. So you don't really have a need to think about what the target resolution is, other than to think about how dense those textures probably have to be versus how closely they're going to be seen and stuff like that. But for this game, since we are doing a 2D game, we may want, especially for background elements, we kind of want the elements to be drawn so that they're the size that they will appear on the screen, so that the pixels will be crisp in the cases where the artist wants to kind of be very specific about what it should look like or things like that. So I guess what I would say is we probably want to think about what we want to run on. And I would say we probably want to do like a 1920 by 1080, so a 1080p target resolution for the game. And for our software renderer, since that's going to be a lot slower than using the GPU, we would probably want to just do like half size or something while we're getting things working. But basically what I'm thinking is that we probably want to take 1920 by 1080, right? That's the resolution if you think about like an HDTV, right? What we would probably ship this game on for people who play on a normal setup, they're probably going to play it on a 1920 by 1080 by 60 hertz display, right? So when we're running on GPU, we would probably be targeting to try and hit that, right? A nice 60 frames a second, full 1080p HD sort of a graphics system, right? So for our purposes, since we're going to be doing our own renderer and it will be much slower than a GPU, obviously, I was thinking maybe we just do essentially what amounts to 8 times less than what this does, right? We do 30 hertz for our, for for the non-GPU version. This is the software version. We do half of each of these, right? So this is actually going to be, what is that? Half of it, so that's 960. Is that right? 960. I had the calculator up and then I closed it. Why did I do that? So let's see here, right? I always check my math because I'm horrible at mental math. Yeah, 960. And then oops. why did that turn into a, why is this a, help me, why is it a, okay, I guess the cursor was just wrong. So half of this guy obviously is 540. So 960 by 540 is what we're shooting here by 30 hertz. So in terms of the number of pixels per second we have to fill, right? This is half, and this is half. So ideally, this would be 1/8 the work, right? So you could think about it as we're writing a 8 times slower. We're targeting something 8 times slower than a GPU, and hopefully we can make that work for our software render. If we can't, it's no big deal, because again, we don't have to ship the software render. It's for educational purposes. But you know, I mean, we're going to try to do some optimization stuff. So I feel like that would be a reasonable goal to try and hit on a modern CPU, is if we can manage to do something comparable to the GPU that's just downscaled by half in all the dimensions, in width, in height, and in time, right? So 960 by 540, I think, is roughly what I might like to do. Let's just say that it is for now, because I don't have a better idea. So 960 by 540 by 30 hertz, we're already at 30 hertz. And I believe we just have a thing in here where we can just basically flat out say what the actual size of the thing is. I think it's just that's it right there. So if I want to, I can say we're just past the game a 960 by 540 display. That's what it's always going to be, and we'll just work on that for now.
I think I might already be doing that exactly the way he's doing it. I don't understand what I am looking at here. Why does that say that I added a comment? Did I not save it? Oh, that's really weird. Let me show you what I'm looking at here. Why does the diff show me that I added a comment here when we removed all of that? That is... Oh, okay. I get it. It's because, well, this was the test file that I was, isn't it in there? Where is it? Isn't it in the game? It's probably in the game package. Or maybe not. Hold on. Hold the phone. It's in data. Data test.out. Yeah, so we built it when we were just a few changes in. But then I removed that code that recopies the file, so I might just remove that change so that it doesn't confuse me again. And now we're good. So what he just did is he went into the main program, and I think I might have actually already made this change. Yeah. Well, that's the size of the window, but I think I actually made the buffer smaller. Is that right? Did I put that in like resize texture? Where does that... Yeah, that's just the... Oh, I see. So I defined... Okay, I defined a window dimension. Yeah, okay, so I'm already on the same page as him. To get to this point, where, well, actually you can't see anything until we draw some stuff out to it. Point is, he just changed the resolution from, what was it, 1980 or 1280 by 720 to 960 by 540. And then this here, this 00 is just the X and Y offset, like in the screen. You'll see. You'll see. Don't worry about it.
All right. So I believe that is something that I will have to restart the app for, because that's in the Win32 platform layer, if I'm not very much in error. So we'll go ahead and compile that. We'll run it, and there we go. So there is our target playfield size is about that big, right? Okay. So first things first. In order to sort of get things working, I am going to write some kind of a rectangle function where you can pass a color, right? And draw a rectangle on the screen, and that rectangle will be, properly clipped. Like, it won't crash if I go outside of the region or whatever. So I want to basically make a simple function we use to draw a rectangle, just so I can have some way of drawing something on the screen as we start to build things. So I'm going to take this rendered player call, which basically was drawing a rectangle, and I'm going to turn it into something that is officially trying to draw a rectangle. So it's going to be something that looks like, draw rectangle. And draw rectangle will take that off-screen buffer that's supposed to draw to, and it will take some integer coordinates. I guess you know what? I'm going to say that it takes floating point coordinates, because I would like to always be able to take floating point coordinates for reasons we'll see a little later. But basically, when we start to cover renderer topics a little later on, you'll see why I might want to start having things always be in floating point, because we'll actually be able to do sub-pixel positioning of sprites by using basically interpolation of colors and stuff. So I'm going to say that we're going to pass an x, a y, and I think for starting off, let's do min x, min y, max x, max y. And there's an interesting thing that happens with rectangles here. And this
part of the problem with watching him at such a fast speed is he's gonna be moving pretty darn fast compared to me at times, but that's fine. It gives me a chance to say something, like to say stuff in my own stream. So he's already way ahead of me just like that, so I have to, we're passing in the min corners, the min corner and the max corner. Is that it? And then we're just gonna draw rectangles between those coordinates.
This is the sort of thing that I'm awful at. This is the kind of thing where you really want Sean Barrett to do a stream or something. Although the last time I said we should ask him to do a stream on software synthesis, he steadfastly refused. So maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree. But there's things to be aware.
What the hell did he just say? Software synthesis? I don't even know what that means.
Of, and we'll kind of go over them in the renderer stuff more. But I will probably even have to do some refresher stuff for my own self for them, because there's all these sorts of complexities that come into play. Basically, you have to understand that anytime you're working with very specific things like rendering, there's sort of the precise definition of what you want actually matters quite a bit. So if you think about it, like if this is my pixel grid, I should probably make a thing that just gets us a pixel grid in the future. That'll have to be something I remember to do. Let's see, a pixel grid that we can quickly get to. Pixel grid. Okay. If you think about something like a pixel grid, right? Then how you specify how you want it filled is actually kind of complicated. Because let's say that I number these locations, right? Like a standard thing like you learned in math class, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, it's pretty easy for me to talk about a specific pixel at that point, because I can just say, well, whatever the two numbers are, here's the x, here's the y. So 0, 0 is this one, you know, and 3, 2 is this one, right? Or something like that. That's not so hard, right? But when you start to say I want to fill something in, you end up with a little bit of confusion, because when I specify the pixels, am I talking about them being inclusive or exclusive? If I tell you to fill from 1, 1 to 3, 3, right? So if I tell you to fill from this to this, am I talking about filling these and not the outer bound? Or am I talking about including that outer bound, right? And that may not seem like it's very complicated to understand and get right. And get right is kind of a confusing term here. There are, when we get again to the rendering stuff, I'll talk a little bit more about it in detail. What are the things that are reasons so that you would care about things in terms of rightness as opposed to just whatever you want it to be. Things get a lot more confusing when you start to allow stuff to move around sub-pixel on the grid. So for example, if I have a sprite, and if the sprite is 3 pixels by 3 pixels, well, it's pretty obvious what would happen if the sprite is lined up exactly like that, right? But if the sprite isn't lined up exactly like that, let's say the sprite is slightly off-center of the pixels, right? You have to understand, you have to have a good convention for understanding exactly how it writes into each of these pixels, how much it contributes, and how this is specified, right? Because now, if I was to specify that rectangle draw from 3, 2 to 6, 5, well, you didn't actually want to fully draw all of these, right? You were talking about only only contributing a portion of the color of each of these sorts of things, and so there's just a lot of kind of finickiness that goes on there. So I just wanted to kind of point out that when I'm doing this draw rectangle here, there's a lot of things you would think about if we were really going to do a draw rectangle call that's our final draw rectangle call. I'm not going to do those. I'm just thinking about purely, okay, what should this do just to get us something roughly that's working? So I'm going to say that basically it does a rounding, right? So it'll take the min x and the min y, it'll round those to an integer. Should it round or should it truncate? I'm going to round. I'm going to say it rounds to an integer. It'll round these to an integer, and then it will fill up to but not including whatever the final one is. I think that's roughly what I'm going to do. So basically, if you were to do with the tile map, you would do like you would fill from 10 to 20 if they were 10 pixels wide. The next one you would fill from 10 to 30, right? So that they're inclusive that way. I'm not going to do 10 to like 19, 20 to 30. And the reason that I'm not going to do that is, again, because of that floating pointness. Really, if you think about it, it makes it a little bit difficult to talk about what happens in between 19 and 20 if you start to think about these things actually having fractional values. So I want to make it so that you can pass two rectangles that abut perfectly, right? So I want to make sure that the rule for how you fill them doesn't draw over that common, in this case, doesn't draw over 20, so that only one person is responsible for filling thing 20, right? So that's just the rule that I'm going to use for this. But again, this is a debug one, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be whatever. All right. So basically, we've got this is our real version of these. We've got our real mins and our real maxes, and I want to give us something where we can basically turn those into.
I don't want it to be real. I don't want to write. I don't want to write real. I can't. I don't know if I can. We'll see. Because like, what I would prefer to do. He uses real because he's old, right? I hate to fire shots at him when he can't defend himself and call him old, but like this is what I would do, right? I would just say F, because if we're gonna have integer versions of all of these, I don't want to type real, because I can't keep it real. I don't know what to tell you.
Do integers. So I am going to do our min x here is going to be the real min x but I need to round it. So I need to round a real 32 to an int 32, right? I want to round it. We haven't written that function yet, but we will. So we got my min x.
I wonder if Odin's. See, I was just talking about how we're gonna need that math package, and I wonder if I can just math.round. Yeah. So I can round, because I don't want to write a rounding function from scratch. I just don't care to do it. So we're going to change all of these into integers. Sorry, I'm not that handmade. This is Odinmade, right? So we aren't going to go that far. We're not going to hand make it. We're going to make it with Odin. That's how I justify this. So we type in f min, if I can type right, y, and then these are max. So we're just taking these floating points, right, which means they have a decimal, they're fractional, and we're making them into nice whole numbers. Maybe f just is wrong, but they are floats. I think that's fine. I don't know. It kind of sounds like I'm abbreviating, like, you know, fuck min x, f min x, man. So what are we? How am I doing this here? Will it just automatically? How does round work? Does it just know? Yeah, it just knows. That is beautiful. I don't even need to tell it what type I'm giving to it. It'll just give me the rounded floating point number back into, well, yeah, no, because so is that gonna work? Is that doing what I think it's going to do? I should verify this, because the last time I just assumed I bamboozled myself. So it kind of looked like if I go here, right? Yeah, no, it comes back. So in what way is it rounding then? Like, can I get an I-32 back from that? I-32, round I-32. Oh, that just doesn't exist. Okay. I need to... Yeah, it gives you back a float. Can I then cast that down? If it's rounding it down... Transmute the biddies. Removes the fractional part of the value. Yes, okay, that is the first comment I should have read. Rounds towards 0. Now, but it's giving me a float back, and I do want it to be an int, so I can just do this, right? And I think that'll work exactly the way Casey is going to want it to work. This stream is my new comfort watch while I play games. Well, that's great. I'm glad that the sound of me click-clacking can comfort you.
At our max x, our max y, so I'm going to go ahead and do those. Let's see there, x, there we go. So min x, real min x, min y, real min y, so I'm just rounding all of the values, right? Once I have these values rounded, one thing you will notice is that these could be anywhere. And the buffer, we are going to, again, that buffer is just a chunk of memory that we write into, where each 32-bit value in the buffer is a pixel color. So what we need to make sure we do is we can't ever write outside of the legal boundary of the buffer, right? So what we want to do now is we want to clip, essentially, to the actual screen. So if this is the screen, right, and this is 0, 0, this is a simple coordinate system here, right, and this is the width and the height of that screen, if you pass me a rectangle that's like that, well, what I want to do is I want to just fill the actual part that we can fill and never write to the part out here, because the part out here would be invalid memory. Well, in the way we've got a bitmap set up, this part would crash. Attempting to write to that part would just flat out crash. And attempting to write to that part would actually, that is actually back here, right? Because you think that the memory's laid out in a stripe, right? It kind of looks like this. So going backwards off the left edge wraps you around to the right edge on the previous line. So anyway, so yeah, so I just want to clip it. And you can see that clipping a rectangle in that sense is very easy, because basically all you're doing is saying if the x value is less than that boundary, whatever the left side boundary is, you just move it to the left side boundary, because the thing that it produces is still a rectangle. So you're basically just taking and making sure that you push the outer extents to the outer extents, and then the minimums get clipped to 0, and the maximums get clipped to the width and height, right? That's all we really have to do to make sure our rectangle comes out fully clipped. So all I really need to do here is say that if min x is less than 0, then min x is going to be equal to 0, right? I'm just saying if that rectangle extended before the leftmost side of the screen, then we just go ahead and make it not do that. And then similarly, for the min y is exactly the same. And then for the maxes, I need to do the same thing as well. The max x, if that's going to be greater than.
Do I do it? Do I if do it, or do I bracket it? That is always the question. What I've seen some Odinites do, I don't know what they call themselves, because you've got like rustations, right? If you're a Rust person, or you're a Pythonista if you're a Python, or if you write Elixir. I mean, there's Elixirist, but I mean, it's so much cooler to be like, I'm an alchemist. I do alchemy when I write code. I brew code. I don't write code. I brew it, and then I drink it, and it's tasty. And my potions are too strong for myself. Okay, so let's just, nope, that's not right. Wanted this to be min y, right? And then this is gonna be max x and max y. And then I'm just gonna rip that and drop those in. And that's probably okay. I don't know. Is that annoying to look at? It's so weird looking at code this close to my face. I'm used to it being like way out there, right? Like I don't know what looks good anymore code formatting wise. I think this is probably fine. It's like as soon as you start adding multiple lines inside of these conditionals that you really want to break it apart. So if we're down below the bound of 0, then we go ahead and assign it to 0. But if we're going above, what is that going to be? That's like the buffer width for x and the buffer height for y, right?
This time. If that's going to be greater than the buffer, and I believe the buffer has the width in it, so we know what size it actually is. Yeah, there it is. So width, if it's greater than the width, then it equals the width, right? And if it's
Java could be brew too, though. How dare you mention Java in my stream? That's a good point, though. I didn't really think about that. I don't know. I mean, Elixir and alchemy, yeah. What's cooler, brewing potions or brewing coffee? I mean, I know programmers, they're all about their coffee, right? So Java and coffee, clever, cute. But I mean, brewing potions sounds so much more dope, right? So I think the Elixirists, the alchemists win that one. But yeah, the whole point of me going off on that tangent was I don't know what people who write, if there's like a name for somebody who writes Odin and Odinite, kind of sounds cool. You could even stylize it like Odin Knight, right? Like you can imagine the Odin mascot. The language doesn't have a mascot, and I kind of hope they never do have a mascot. But if they were gonna have one, it should be a knight, an Odin knight, and he's got a big sword. And yeah, that's enough of that.
Greater, oops, that's good. And if it's greater on the y, same thing. If that's greater than the height, then it equals the height, right? All we're doing is clamping those values to something valid, right? And what I want to do here, again, when I'm doing this, you'll notice that I left them.
Okay, slow down, Casey. I know you're going 50% faster than you usually go, but still catching up. I think that looks right.
I left it so that it was actually right on the boundary. Now, normally that wouldn't be a valid pixel, right? Because if the width is, let's say, 8, then 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the last valid pixel I could fill is 7. Trying to fill 8 would write off the end of the buffer. Yet I am allowing this to be equal to 8, essentially, if the buffer was 8 wide. Why is that? Well, it's because I just said before that I'm not going to write, the rectangle's going to fill up to, but not including that final row. So that's actually okay, if that makes sense. All right, so now in order to fill this guy, I'm going to need a color to fill him with.
So much toggling back and forth.
Okay, right? And so in order to pass the color, I'm going to pass a real value again, R, G, and B. And we're going to pass them. I'm going to go a little bit over for the Q&A because I just want to finish this one function since we're already here. But then we'll keep it brief. So what I need to do now is I need to, well, you know what? That's not true. That's not true at all. I don't have to do the color. I'll just use white for now, and then we will do the color tomorrow, so that way I won't go any further over time. So that'd be good. Yeah, okay. So I'll just put to do in here. Color tomorrow. That'll be the first thing we'll do. So then all I need to do is step through the pixels. I know that I want to start, I don't know why this is by X and then by Y, probably because that's what your things, but if you think about the way memory is arranged, our X's are contiguous and our Y's are not, right? Y's have to step by this pitch value, whereas X's do not have to do that. And so what I would rather do here is
Right. So what he's saying is instead of iterating through Xy's first, we go through the Y. So I guess we'll just do that. Trade the nested loops. And I'll probably just get rid of all of this, right? I had to write this a little bit differently from him because of the way that Odin... I don't want to go off on that tangent right now. I'll explain it if for some reason that ever becomes truly relevant to the task at hand.
I would rather step it the other way. I'd rather step it, excuse me. I'd rather step such that we were not, that we were touching contiguous pixels one right after each other and then only doing a jump to the next row. I don't want to do it by rows because it's going to be more friendly to the cache, obviously. It's going to be more friendly to touch things that are right next to each other. So I'm going to go by Y's first and then by X's because that happens to be how things are lined up. So we're going to go from min X until we get to, min Y until we get to max Y. We're going to go from min X through to max X, and then we are going to write the pixels. So the first pixel that we write, obviously, is going to be wherever the buffer starts in memory. We're going to have to go by however many bytes per pixel it is. We're going to have to go that far over for our min X because we want to start it that far in, and the same for our min Y. So we need.
Okay, so he's actually... Okay, I'll see. This is actually... I'm probably going to have to go off on that tangent. So the way that he's accessing the memory, right, if you think about... the fact that all the pixels on your screen, even the pixels that you're looking at right now, right, on the stream, they all are coming from memory on your machine, right? And so there's values, there's pixel values for all of the colors and every single pixel that's drawn to your screen. He's writing out to that on his side by using a pointer, but I'm using a slice in Odin. So the way I'm accessing the memory is, more safe. And I use air quotes, but it actually is supposed to be more safe because if he writes outside of that memory that he has for the screen buffer or the frame buffer, then he's gonna seg fault, right? And it's gonna break things, and then you're not gonna really know where the error is coming from. The nice thing about slices is you can tell that you're outside of the bounds of the memory that you should be touching, and the compiler will let me know, hey, you tried to write outside of the bounds of the slice that you have. Don't do that. Figure out what's going on and don't do that. So it means I need to access that memory differently in Odin, but it's it just means that the implementation looks a little bit different. And this is where the true understanding of what the hell is going on comes in, because I wouldn't have that understanding of why this is different and from what he's doing it and the way he's doing it. I wouldn't understand where the actual conceptual things going on with the actual computer memory if I wasn't translating it into this other language. If I was just rote copying him, right, then it wouldn't be as enlightening. Anyway, so he is offsetting the pixel by min X times the buffer, so bytes per pixel, because there's a number of bytes per pixel on your screen to make up the actual value of the pixel color. And then we're going by min Y, so the bottommost Y value times the pitch, and the pitch, right, is the what is the pitch? That's just like the width. I think the pitch is just this value right here. Or no, it's this value, the number of bytes per pixel, times the actual width in pixels of the buffer. That probably was, it's hard to just say these things and express them. I got to get my own whiteboard at some point, I guess. Like a memory leak. It's not like leaking memory. It's just you asked for some memory, right? And this is the memory that the operating system has given you, and you're allowed to use it and write to it and do whatever you want with it. But if you start writing outside of the bounds of that, right, it's like trying to fit too many people in a car. You just explode and die, right? Hypothetically, if someone was interested in learning coding, how would said James go about beginning? Said James. You can just start doing anything, honestly. If you just look up like a Python tutorial, like just start and see if coding is interesting to you. And if it is, you'll just start driving yourself towards learning more and more. But if you have if you have an inkling of like what is the thing you actually want to do with code, then you're gonna have an easier time figuring it out, because then you can look and see what are the types of languages and tools that are used for games, or used for making websites, or used for just whatever that niche is. That, like, if you have an idea for something you want to build, then go and figure out how to build the thing, and then that'll inform the language you choose. But there's so many resources, and what I would say is once you start tackling those resources, find somebody. It doesn't have to be me. You could go find a Discord for a programming language. There's every single programming language seemingly has its own Discord now, even the really small and niche ones. Like Odin is not a hugely popular language, right? But they have a Discord with like 5,000 people that are in that server. So just start somewhere and then start asking questions to people that you see have some kind of leadership, or so they have some degree of authority. Like if you ask questions of some random, you might not get the best answers versus asking like a core maintainer of something, whether it's a tool or a language or whatever. Okay, where was I?
To pre-advance the pointer to our pixel memory, we want to pre-advance the pointer so that it's pointing at the top left corner of the rectangle, right? So that it's pointing, if the rectangle is here, right? We want to take our pointer, which starts at here on memory. We want to point the pointer right there, right? We want to point it at that point. So we need to add however much it takes us to get down to this row, which is the pitch, which is how much you add per row, times however many rows we want it to go down, right? Which is the minimum y. So we go down that many rows, and then we have to go over by however many pixels, however many bytes per pixel there are for the number of pixels that we are over at x, which is min y. Sorry, which is min x. So we need to kind of bump after we move down to the start of the row that we start on. We need to go over to get the start of the column, right? And that's where we're going to start. Then from there, we just fill the pixels. When we get to the end of a row, we go down to the next row, fill the pixels, right? So all we need to do here, and again, this is not how we won't do anything like this in the final render, but we're just making a debug call that does a simple fill of a rectangle. So basically what we need to do is we need to go ahead and fill our pixels here. So there we go. So this I should probably call it the row pointer.
I think because he did the bounds, let's see here. Make sure I didn't just screw something up. I keep on tabbing between things and it's getting me frazzled. I think because he set the bounds of the min x and the min y, it's just, I feel like this is gonna crash on me. I'm gonna screw this up, but we're just gonna go ahead and say, give me the point in the buffer where the minimum corner of the triangle starts, right? Which is at the offset that I specified just above here, and then I'll hope that it doesn't blow up. You can see I added some stuff in here, some checks to make sure that I wouldn't crash my game, and it just looks a little bit different from the way he did it, so I have to think carefully about what I'm doing, or I'm just going to write something that breaks.
Since that's what that is. So this is the row pointer, and it will advance every time we advance in y. We will go down, and then we will go down one entire row, and then the same is true for x. We are going to get we write pixels. Each pixel is 32 bits, so we're going to write to 32 bits at a time. So now we have our pixel pointer is going to be equal to our row pointer. We're going to cast it up to UN32, so we can write UN32s at a time. We left this one as a UN8 because we were adding the pitch is in bytes, and we know that C++.
Oh, okay. So he actually took it as a row, not a pixel. It's a row of pixels. So we're going to start off at whatever row, and then we're going to say that the pixel is starting over here. And I'm going to have to transmute this, which is not something that the Odin people like you to do, because it feels wrong, I guess. I don't know. There's no other way to go about doing this the way that Casey is doing it without just using pointers the way that he's using them and not using slices, so I'm just going to go for it. And then this is a byte, so I think that's just fine. I think I can just say that's my row. And then, yeah, we're casting that over to a U32 slice, and I'm just going to comment this out. And then over here, yeah, you can see I already had to do it over here. And then I'm dereferencing the slice and assigning it to that color. and I think that's fine.
MC always do a multiplication for you, so we don't want it to.
And instead of changing the pixel we're at inside of that nested loop, we can do it out here, right? And we're just going to go up by the pitch. And yeah, so I had this check here to make sure I wasn't advancing past the end of the slice because of just the way that I had written it. I kept on crashing, but maybe I can make this look pretty similar to Casey's. We'll see.
Multiply by anything here when it's doing that addition. We want to just add that raw byte value to the pointer. So we go in here, we write to the pixel, we write the color, and I believe that's mostly all we really need. We do need our rounding function.
Yeah, and then he has to go and implement the round. So I don't need to do this part because we've already turned the row. When we define pixel up here, it's already a U32 slice. So I think I can just dereference it here and say this is the color that I want in that pixel, and that might just be it. X is not used. That's fine. We can just ignore it. And you have to call it. You have to call the proc before you can use it. So that's why we're not seeing anything there. I'll just wait for Casey to implement that round, and we'll see. I'm running pretty low on time here, so I will not get to the Q&A, but hopefully I can at least get to the point where we see a rectangle.
So, for our rounding function, to be honest with you, I don't know if C has ever introduced a proper rounding intrinsic. It probably is. We should look for it. But for now, we're going to implement it just the old-fashioned way. We'll talk about how to do the rounding. In fact, I'll put it to do in here to do intrinsic. Okay. So this passes in a real 32 value, and it wants to do a result value that comes out. So if we actually just cast it, right? If we actually just cast a real 32 to an int32, the default thing that C will do is it will truncate the value, right? So what it will do is it'll just lop off the fractional part entirely. So if you think about what that does on the number line, right? If I'm in here, and here's my number line, here's 0, right? Here's 1, 2, -1, -2. If I'm in here, right, and I wanted to round this value, here's 0.5 in the middle, right? If I'm going to round this value, I want it to be 1, because we all know that when you round, you take which side of that dividing line you're on, and you round up or down, right? Well, I don't want to do that because if I truncate, I'll go down to 0 because truncation just removes the fractional part entirely. And this was 0.75 or something, right? Who knows what that was in there. So just get rid of 75, be left with 0. I don't want to do that. I want it to round up. So what I can do is I can change truncation to rounding trivially by just biasing the number before I truncate it. So for example, if I add 0.5 to the number, right, that will push up anything that was in this half. It will push it up into here, right? And anything that wasn't here will get pushed up into here. When I truncate, then all of the stuff that was
yeah, truncate is what my round, or rather the Odin core package in math rounds comment said, which is that, like, what are you doing when you're rounding? There's the idea of rounding it to the floor of so you're just slicing off the fractional part, right? And you're just left with the integer, but you can also round up. And there's also there's a difference. I think that's what he's going over here right now. I need to make sure that it is the same, because if you're rounding towards 0, if you're truncating towards 0, that's different from just slicing off the fractional part and just being left with a number. Because technically -3 is less than -2, right? So if you had -2.5 and then you rounded that, like, are you rounding it towards 0 or are you rounding it like down? Are you doing like a floor?
Was in here that got moved to here will still truncate back down, will still round back down to 0, which is what it should have done when I do the truncation. But anything that was in here will be moved up to above 1. There'll be 1 point something. And then when I truncate, it will go back down to 1, which is what I wanted, which is rounding up, right? So basically by just rounding and truncation for simple values like that are pretty easy for me to deal with, because I can just do that plus point.
And I should probably just go ahead and verify that that is the case. If I come up here to round and I just go and take a look at this, yeah, it removes this is trunk. So we can round or we can trunk. Trunk is a specific proc in here, and round, okay. So yeah, I didn't catch if that's what he said. Do we want it to truncate? I think we want it to truncate like down to like to get rid of, like, if we're at -2.5, we want to truncate not truncate, we want to round down to 3. Is that right? Or if it's like negative 2.49, it would be rounding up to 2. Now I got myself confused.
Now 5. Now, there's a lot more to thinking about these sort of things than just that, but for now, that's going to have to suffice. And so that's an easy way to turn that simple C truncation operation into something that roughly does rounding for the cases we care about. But we'll have to talk about that a little bit more when we have time, because there's a whole set of topics to talk about.
Yeah, it's true. We're not rounding negative numbers anyways, since we're going, we're starting at the beginning of the buffer is 0. It's 0, 0. But I still want to make sure I'm using the right rounding function, you know what I mean? Or rounding proc, I should say.
About with floating point values and rounding and all that sort of stuff. But there we go. That's our draw rectangle call. So let's just, before we go to Q&A, let's just test to see if it works at all. We can see if it just full out crashes or anything. Oops, got to get out of the way of my head there. Okay. So let's just see if we can draw something that's like this, right?
Okay. Easy enough. This I can do. Yeah, I think it's probably fine, because if he was defining it as a truncate, then he would call it truncate, right? Truncating to 0 versus rounding a float. Really a very simple thing, but somehow I can't intuit it because I haven't had to deal with it enough to where it just becomes secondhand knowledge that I can recite offhand. So is buffer already a pointer? I do believe it is, and then we're just going to pass in, we're starting off at 10, x10, y10, and then we're going up to 30, 30. And, oh, it's because I call it a frame buffer to make sure I know which buffer I'm talking about. Because there's so many different kinds of buffers. Is it a sound buffer? Is it a frame buffer? Is it just a plain old memory buffer? It's all just memory. It's all just bytes in the end, right?
Let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. Let's see if mine blows up. That is a really tiny rectangle, but I see it. That is way too small.
If we get anything at all. Hello? What's going on here? Oh, it was already running, I guess. There we go.
Okay, clearly I did something wrong. Maybe it just looks like it's filling in the same pixel. Yeah. So where did I go wrong? It's always painful when we actually go to run the thing and it's like, oh, I did not do what you said it was going to do. I did not do what you thought it was going to do. Yeah, so we cast the row, or transmute the row, I should say, to a U32. And then we dereference it, say that's the color we want at that pixel. And then we're advancing by the pitch. Oh, it's because... Yeah. Yeah, so we need to... I changed the pixel. I advanced by the pixel, which is not what you want. So that's why... Yeah, okay. And we want to go by... Hold on.
Color, and I believe that's...
So he's going up. Yeah, okay, so we want to go up by... We're advancing by another row is what this is saying. It's saying let's advance this much further into the slice so that we get to the next row of pixels. Still not quite right, but we have more white on the screen than we did before. So what went wrong here? It's saying, what the hell? Now I'm stumped. I mean, we got a stick. We don't have a rectangle yet, but we got a stick. Technically, I guess it's a rectangle. Pixel 0 should be pixel current x. Yeah, so we're indexing. This is the same thing as dereferencing. This isn't even technically dereferencing anything. It would be in Zig. The way you dereference a many item pointer is you actually index into, like, this is the step into the pointer or to the memory that the pointer points to that I want to go to. It's the same thing though as doing, would it be like this to dereference, right? We're saying, and I think that's what Casey's code does. Yeah. Actually, you dereference, I don't know if you can actually dereference it with the star behind, but you would dereference it like this and say this is the color that I want at that pixel, but then he increments it too. And neither of those are how you do it in Odin. But that is the problem. I just figured it out. It's because we are not advancing the pixel at all. We need to advance by the Xth that we're on, right? Or actually, it should just be 1 like this, I think. That's the same thing, I think. And we're still not using that X, so I reintroduced that for no good reason. I think this will work. Yep, okay. Whew. Oh my god. I was like, no, don't choke at the end of the stream and fail to draw your little square.
Mostly all we really need. We do need our rounding function. So, for our rounding function, to be honest with you, I don't know if C has ever introduced a proper rounding intrinsic. It probably is.
Let me go back to where I was. Because he's in the, whoa, now he's drawing all kinds of rectangles. If I go back here, he implements the round, and then, I mean, he tests it, doesn't he? Yeah, okay.
There we go. So there's our rectangle, and I'm going to go ahead and see if it crashes if I move it to something that's out of bounds, right? So there we go. And it looks like...
Oh, no. Well, yeah, I mean, that should work just fine, right? If I can get rid of these. Yeah, this looks mucho better now. I go down here and say, let's start our rectangle off at -10. It should just do exactly what Casey's did, and yep, it just kind of starts at the beginning of the screen and starts stretching out to the bounds of the rectangle. Looking good.
That looks like it worked probably because I'm not clearing the screen currently. So you know what? I could use this to clear the screen if I could pass a color. We could pass a color really quickly just to try this out. We could pass just a color that doesn't get handled properly, right? I could do, let's see, like this, floating point color tomorrow. Right. So I know I'm...
Okay. All right. Really running low on time here by the skin of my teeth. We're gonna go over to my mom's and have some delicious salsa and beans. Me and the whole family. So I gotta wrap this up. I just want to get to the end of the coding portion, you know, and then we can worry about the Q&A tomorrow. Floating point color tomorrow, and then what was it? A U32? He makes it. U32. And so that means we're gonna get rid of that for now, and then when we go to draw rectangle, we're gonna put in our white color. That's what that is.
Passing the color in so I can do something where we do like a clear to 0 first. In fact, we could clear to something else. We could clear to like some hideous purple and then draw something equally hideous.
Some hideous purple. Despicable purple. This was pretty painless, all things considered. I just, you know, took me a while to figure out that I was not incrementing the pixel as we were going and stepping through those loops, but it all is seemingly working out fine in the end here. And these are all zeros.
Yes, the cyan in there. And so we'll clear to purple, draw cyan. So we were 0, 0, and we said what was the well, I guess we could just say whatever the buffer width and buffer height are. Like that.
That's right. So we're starting off at the, so we're going to 0. We're just clearing the screen with a big old rectangle, right? We're writing in 0, 0, and then we're gonna go the width of the buffer all the way up to the width and the height of the buffer, right? And again, I need to call this my frame buffer. Cool. That's still not working. What am I missing here? What is that error telling me? Cannot assign type int to type F32. I see. You want me to make this a float. And this is getting pretty lengthy here, so I might just do this for this call. Just bump that down so that we're not going completely off the screen. I think that looks good.
Let's see here. These have to be floating point values, but I think other than that,
I beat him to the cast. And there you go. That is yellow, not purple. Did I write that in wrong? It looks like I did. Now we're purple. Beautiful. Beautiful, hideous purple. Purple haze. Purple, I don't know. Ran out of, oh, that reminds me of True Detective. Purple Haze. What a great, if your nickname could be Purple Haze, wouldn't you just, like, feel amazing every time somebody called you by, hey, what's up, Purple? I love that character. What a great season of television that was.
we are good. Let's see. Where is my game? Did I close the game? I need to learn to stop closing the game. So it looks like that's not quite right. Or is that quite right? Did I actually? Oh, I didn't. I still used that. So I want to change it to that. Does that work properly?
I see. He bumped this down. Yeah, to make the rectangle not go out as far. That's all.
Doesn't look like it. Does not look like it to me. I think I might have a bug there. It's weird having bugs in things I would not normally have bugs in. It's tough on the stream because, like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm ever going to quite get used to that. But I will say it's been difficult programming on the stream because I tend to make careless mistakes because I'm talking that I don't normally make, and it makes it sometimes disquieting for me to program, if that makes sense. So let's see here. So that looks like it's maybe sort of working. I don't want to say that it definitely is, but it does seem to be doing roughly correct. I'm going to spot check it just in case because...
Say
again,
it ain't so. Just tell me it works. Please don't play with my heartstrings like this. It looks good to me, man. That is drawing where I would expect it to draw. Maybe I should just leave it running because I keep having to build and then compile and rerun and then, you know, I'm doing all this. So let's see, where do we wind up? When does the rectangling stop?
I just kind of slammed that in there really quickly. So I have my min x, real min y, real max x, real max y, min x, blah blah blah. Min x is less than 0, min y is less than 0. That's all good. Should be fine. Max s is greater than buffer width. Looks about right to me. Oh, there it is. See that? That's not actually anything we were seeing. That's totally buggy. We'll have to test this rectangle function a little later. Looks good. Min x, yeah, max x.
So what he did is he had, I think he had those max values assigned inappropriately, but looks good to me. Min x. I wrote it in right.
X. More buggers. Is there any buggers? Come out wherever you are. All right, well, I think we're gonna have to call that for the day. It looks like it's sort of working, but again, slam that in pretty quickly. We'd like to test that a little bit more, just make sure we don't have any stupid mistakes in there. Let's try something way off the screen. Hey, we didn't crash, that's good. How about way off the bottom? Also didn't crash. Try some ridiculousness. No crashes. So, okay. So I'm pretty happy with that. So let us go to the Q&A, I would say. Don't want to be too much over time. I know that going over time makes it hard for people who try to catch up and stuff because they have long streams to watch. So I try not to do that. Looks like that is good enough for today. I'm happy with that. That basically gets us in a position tomorrow. I've explained all the things that I want to do. We have a way to draw a rectangle. So tomorrow I should be able to basically start building tile maps, and we'll see where that goes. So totally good. Again, it's always a little tough stopping the stream because I'm always like, well, now let's build a tile map. But wait till tomorrow. For that. For now, let's go to the Q&A. Basically, if you want to go ahead and I'm pushing the Q&A button now. So if you want to go ahead and ask a question, please.
All right. Unfortunately, I do not have time to go into the Q&A as much as I would like to. I'd love to be able to get like one day done in one stream. I don't know if I'll ever really get into that groove just because I'm constantly pausing and going off on tangents, but I got to go. Thanks for hanging out, those of you who have been hanging out. What's a stand-up streamer? I have no idea. Did I miss something? I'm not sure what you're going on about there. But yeah, pretty successful day. I didn't get stuck on anything particularly dumb, and I didn't, you know, spend a bunch of time trying to troubleshoot some bug that I introduced before I even started the stream. That's always pretty painful. I'm sure that it won't be the last time where I discover something like that, but cool. We have drawing of rectangles. We are it took me 27 days, but I can do what you can do with Raylib in about 5 minutes now. But I have complete control over it. That feels good. But it's not GPU or accelerated or anything like that. We'll get there. We'll get there. Thanks, Devil. Thanks again to all of you for hanging out. I'm really enjoying myself. I'm hoping, really hoping that, you know, I can just keep on getting more and more in the groove with this. It feels like talking through it. I feel like if I hadn't been talking out loud when I was trying to figure out why I was just drawing the stick instead of the whole rectangle, if I hadn't been doing the rubber duck thing and talking out loud, it might well have taken me longer to figure that out. There is something about talking out loud that helps you, you know, think through the problem and be like, oh, the answer is right there. I just saw it by just looking at it and going, oh, this is how Casey's doing it. Oh, of course, you know, he incremented the pointers, he incremented the pixel to keep going down the line and inserting those color values, but I just saw it and I was like, oh, I didn't even consider that step because I totally blew past it. So yeah, we'll do it again tomorrow. It's cool you're sharing this process. Have a good one. Thank you. Yeah, I'll keep on trying to do so. Meant to be startup streamer. I still don't understand. You come back tomorrow and tell me. All right, guys, I gotta go.